Well, the college football world kind of feels like the Upside Down or playing musical chairs with coaches and players. Well, you'd be right. And the latest news out today involving a pair of SEC teams. And these two teams were in the headlines just a couple of weeks ago when Lane Kiffin made the move from Oxford, Mississippi to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Well, Frank Wilson will be doing the opposite. The interim head coach for the LSU Tigers in the bowl game will soon after go over to Oxford to be the running backs coach at Ole Miss. It's a crazy world out there. We're here to break it down on Southeast Sports Plus. I'm Gerhard Mathangani, joined by Patrick Walsh. Patrick, this has been a really interesting dynamic here in the coaching world. And it's not just Ole Miss LSU. And we'll touch on another one that reminds me of this in a heartbeat between two rivals in the SEC. But this is a really interesting situation as it relates to what could possibly be down the road in recruiting for both of these teams as they look to set their rosters for the 2026 season.
Yeah, and I think this obviously all goes back to Lane Kiffin taking the LSU job about a month ago now, and everything, all the hoopla around it. It was, a lot of people were basically anticipating that moment for about a month prior, and all of these players and coaches kind of had to silence the noise and still play football. And I mean, kudos to the Ole Miss team for basically weathering the storm, so to speak, in that regard, and still finishing with a great season now, obviously under Pete Golding as they head into the college football playoff. But this is just another wrinkle in what I think is just got to be one of the craziest, sequence of events in recent memory. I mean, I know in college football we've had plenty of crazy sequences with coaches leaving, and you take your staff to a new place, and then the whole what John Summerall is doing right now for Tulane, donating $100,000. That's what some people are considering the right way to leave and not taking any of the recruits. And I mean, you've got Lane Kiffin on one end, and then you got John Summerall on the other end. But this new wrinkle with Frank Wilson going to take the running backs coach job over at LSU or over at Ole Miss after how much he said he loved the state of Louisiana and the university as well. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it adds drama and intrigue. You have to think of the chain of events that have happened just since Thanksgiving. Since Black Friday happened, you had Ole Miss and Mississippi State meet in the Egg Bowl. Then soon after that, you had Lane Kiffin taking his talents over there to LSU, and then Frank Wilson being obviously the interim coach, and you thought that they had some things bubbling there. He's a Louisiana guy, by the way. He's Louisiana native, but he had some time at Ole Miss before. I think 2005 to 2007. He was an assistant coach there at Ole Miss, so he's not completely new to that program. But then since then, we've had all these domino effects, and then sandwiched in between that, the SEC did the best thing ever, made the first SEC game between these two teams in Ole Miss as Lane Kiffin goes back. So the SEC just has added more drama and more intrigue to what is already going to be a really interesting game between these two to open up next season. However, both teams are really trying to do their best to navigate this upcoming year, starting with Ole Miss in the playoff.
I would argue that this return for Lane Kiffin is easily going to top his return to Knoxville. Just based on the hype. I mean, obviously, he spent more time in Oxford than he did in Knoxville.
Right.
I mean, I don't remember as messy of a breakup, so to speak. The one in Knoxville is messy, but not like this, where you basically are giving your coaches an ultimatum where, hey, you need to get on the plane with me or else there's not going to be a spot for you.
Right, and I think one of the key differences in his departure from Knoxville as his departure from Ole Miss is that his departure from Knoxville, it wasn't like they were coming off of a great season.
Right.
What was happening is that you saw the signs of, this could work with Lane, and it felt like, okay, you're building towards something. This is completely different because now you have a team legitimately in the hunt for the national championship. So the Tennessee one, it was like, we haven't had a good coach in a while. It was outside of, obviously, Philip Fulmer had a good run, but it was like it was built on basically like a hope of a potential national championship future, not based on like, hey, what we're already doing. Not to mention, at the time, I think deep down Tennessee fans kind of knew that at the time that Southern Cal was a better job.
Yeah.
They just didn't want to admit it to themselves. So the vitriol came from, you're leaving us for, and it was almost like an anger because you're like, okay, you're leaving us for what you consider a better program. We don't consider a better program, but even though deep down they knew it. I think a lot of Ole Miss fans probably justifiably think well, this is a lateral move in 2025
I think
standards.
It is. I still think it is. Right. I mean, Ole Miss has the resources, it has the NIL. It seems like Lane Kiffin, as much as he wants to admit it or not, I think his heart was always in. He was always going to take the Ole Miss or the LSU job. Yeah. I don't think he ever was going to come back to Ole Miss, and this was just him, pondering and just waiting until the last minute. Because I mean, when you follow the chain of events for Lane Kiffin, you mentioned the USC job opening up, and then going and taking that, and then the outcry after, and then the firing on the tarmac. He goes to join Nick Saban's staff, and then Saban basically fires him before the national championship because he was so distracted on the new job over at FAU, and then he leaves FAU for Ole Miss, and Ole Miss was the longest stop he made somewhere, but you could just tell, as much as he wanted to admit that he's a changed person, as much as, the documentary wanted to paint him in a different light, I mean, he still is the same person. He's still Lane Kiffin. Right. And this one, just, in my honest opinion, and what I've gathered from all the information that's come out in the about month since this whole thing went down, was that Lane Kiffin was always going to take this job, and he was just never coming back to Ole Miss, and he just wanted to wait until the last minute.
Absolutely. Speaking from the Ole Miss perspective here, how big is this, do you think, for Pete Golding to be able to get a caliber of a guy like Frank Wilson with his recruiting background?
Yeah, I mean, he's worked with 2 5-stars and 4 8-star running backs since 2022, and now I will say, those running backs since 2022 have kind of underperformed. I mean, when we look at some of the numbers, this year they averaged 106.6 yards per game on the ground. That was 123rd. We've been talking about the run game struggles all year. We thought Caden Durham was going to be one of the better running backs. But I will say this, 2024, 116.4 yards per game, 108. And now I see the number in 2023. It's 204 yards per game, and that was 11th. But you got to remember Jaden Daniels had 94.3 yards per game. So, I mean, you take that out, it's pretty much been the same thing. Right. Now, I will say this. There's a caveat. He's a great recruiter, but when you look at some common themes of struggles for LSU during that time, it feels like we've always been talking about the offensive line struggling. Yeah. And you cannot have a good run game. This is where it blows my mind to some people, is like when they harp on teams not having a good run game, but the offensive line is awful, and cannot block anything. They just stand there like, the guys when they rush the field, the security guys, they just stand there and do nothing. Yeah. You cannot just be like, oh, he's a bad running back. Oh, he's a bad coach. Correct. I mean, when there's no holes, you can't get through.
It's one of the weirdest, I think, when people talk about running games, sometimes in ways beyond me, it doesn't necessarily start with the offensive line. It starts with the running back. It starts with the scheme. It starts with the coach. And a lot of times it's like, hey, do you have 5 guys that can play on a string in the trenches that can make your running game really work? Because we've even seen average running backs come in and, play well with great offensive line. So it really starts there up front. And like you said, a lot of times you can't have your quarterback being half of your rushing, production like we saw with Jaden Daniels, unless you have just a dynamic talent there at running back or there at quarterback like a Lamar, like a Jaden Daniels, like a Josh Allen, or somebody who could run really potently and bring that part of his game out to the forefront. So I am interested to see how Lane retools that, because between Lane and Frank Wilson, you would think there would be enough, whether portal interest and or what they can recruit out of high school and out of the early part of the signing day when guys get out of their agreements early on and get inside the portal. But it will be interesting because he is a good recruiter, but sometimes doesn't seem like the numbers match up.
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about Frank Wilson here.
Yes.
Okay.
So with Lane, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Lane, he just signed the #1 player in next year's class, and who knows if he's going to be able to take Kewan Lacey away from Oxford. That's to be seen. I know Ole Miss signed. Here's that terminology again. Agreed to more deals. It still sounds so weird in today's world. But here's the most interesting thing. not only is Frank Wilson going to Ole Miss, we basically have a trade going on here because LSU gets Billy Glasscock, the former Ole Miss general manager, and Ole Miss gets Austin Thomas, the former LSU general manager, and Frank Wilson, the former LSU running backs coach. And we don't know what Kevin Smith's future is. I know he's going to coach the running backs through the college football playoff here, but could he follow Lane Kiffin to LSU so we basically have a 2-for-2 trade?
And this would be really interesting because you do have a lot of dynamics here because obviously these two schools from a straight up proximity standpoint are relatively close to one another.
Right.
So it's not like these people are uprooting their homes and their lives. They're not going from one coast to the other. So a lot of this makes sense on paper too. But also it seems to feel like while Lane Kiffin and Pete Golding were, they were in the same meeting rooms like 5 weeks ago, game planning and whatnot. And now it feels like a subtle war between the two to be able to, whether it's get talent, get coaches and everything else. And you're now having to recruit not just a roster, but you're having to recruit a staff and a support staff and a front office, so to speak. And we're talking weird terms like blending college and pro, almost building a front office. And it feels like they're just taking from one another.
We already are doing that with general managers and everything. I mean, that's just today's college football, college anything world. But, I will be very interested to see. You and I talked off air about this, and we'll talk more about the Ole Miss Tulane game tomorrow. But it will be very interesting to see how Ole Miss comes out in that game in the first half. You brought that up to me because then it's going to be like, all right, is this team actually a contender?
Right.
Or is it a potential fraud, as some people like to throw that term around, which I still think is kind of crazy. I don't think Ole Miss is a fraud. But the only thing I worry about is, will Kewan Lacey end up entering the portal? Will Trinidad Chambliss end up entering the portal? Because he said he's going to weigh his options after the season, which I think is crazy to say before the season's even done. That's talk like you're done and you've got like a bowl game or something. That's bowl game talk, not college football playoff talk. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it does feel like even if his mind's in a different place, it feels like he's 1 foot out the door in this situation there going into next week. But I'm with you in as far as I want to see how LSU comes out or Ole Miss comes out in that first half of that bowl game. It'll have been, I think, 3 weeks since they had played the Egg Bowl in their final game. So there's enough time to decompress everything, and we'll find out how they'll all roll when they rematch against Tulane there in the college football playoff. Ole Miss in the upcoming season. We mentioned that game there against LSU in the SEC opener. So shout out